Welcome, everyone, to Hands-On Politics, where we talk to the latest movers and shakers in the political world. We're not a left or right thing. We're a constitutional thing. Ken, it's great to see you again.
Rich, it's great to see you. This is Thanksgiving week. And, you know, there's been a lot of things in the country this past year that haven't been all that great. But I'll tell you what, there's still a lot to be thankful for in this country. And I was thinking we should probably release this episode of Hands-On Politics on Thanksgiving morning, so people can sit around the TV and watch Hands-On Politics instead of watching the NFL games. What do you think?
I think that's a great recipe for a great Thanksgiving. That'll bring people together, I'm sure, talking about politics at the Thanksgiving table. I think that's a beautiful idea. So, Ken, you know, we're coming off a great interview with Chris Arps last week, radio host, political activist. That was a great interview. And this week we have another fantastic guest. Why don't you tell our viewers about our guest today?
I certainly will. Rich, you know, as a member of Americans for Citizen Voting, I've gotten to know our guest a little bit, but as I've prepared for this episode, wow, I realized there's a lot more to know about him. Our guest is a libertarian ballot measure activist. He's a prolific writer and podcaster who covers issues as diverse as hate crimes and term limits, the draft, international relations. You name it, he talks about it. His podcast and blog can be found at thisiscommonsense.org. He's the president at the Liberty Initiative Fund. Some might say that our guest is a modern Renaissance man, but I just call him a friend. With that introduction, please welcome to Hands-On Politics, the one and only Paul Jacob. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Ken. Wow, he's good. Well, I appreciate the friend because it has been good. I've gotten to know you a little bit this year, and it's been quite fun, and I think we're going to have more fun.
Before we get into the deep politics, I want people to get a little bit of an idea of what makes Paul Jacob tick. And so we're going to have a little lightning round here. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about yourself, and we'll just kind of go through it pretty quickly. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Evergreen Park, Illinois, which is the south suburb of Chicago, in 1960. I lived there for a couple of years. Moved to New Jersey, Old Bridge, New Jersey. My dad worked in New York for a while, and then got transferred to Arkansas. And so in 1968, we moved to Arkansas, and that was a little bit of a culture shock for us. And we all grew up in Arkansas, and we've moved here and there. I still have relatives in North Little Rock, Arkansas, where we lived in Little Rock, but all over the country now. Chicago, Washington, D.C., New Hampshire. So, and from a political standpoint, maybe you'll ask me this, but I'll volunteer it. Some people say, well, how'd you get involved in politics? We had two subjects, only two that could be talked about at the dinner table: politics and religion. We had kind of a fostered, give your opinion, and then let's talk about it. And I had 5 brothers and sisters, Catholic family, very much your life is between you and God, and go do what you, never any pressure to be something except tremendous pressure to be something we would individually be proud of. I won the lottery, I think, in terms of being born into the family I was born into, and we'll never quite pay it back, but maybe here and there a little bit.
Ken, that sounds really familiar with our family. You know, we were one of those families as well, Paul, where it was encouraged to argue and argue with the good sense of the term, right? To stand up for what you believed in and to make your case, and everybody was respected, and it really built up sense of confidence in, you know, being able to stand up to other folks. It made you understand how to prepare for a debate every time we were going to these family gatherings. I mean, I would be so excited, couldn't wait for my father and my Aunt Kathy to get into it, or Jay, who was on the real liberal side of the family. That was some of the most exciting times for us growing up. To your point, Paul, it was encouraged to be politically in tune with what was going on.
And that respect not only taught, I think, us to respect ourselves and our own right to have our own opinion and so on, but also to respect each other's opinion, and that it didn't have to be the same thing, and that you could see where somebody else was coming from. And that's oftentimes missing. And I'm not talking about, oh, let's just compromise away everything we believe in, because
Mhm.
I'm for compromising nothing that's essential that we believe in as core values, but respecting the other side. I think it's also a winning strategy. So I would advise people, there's always tomorrow and then the day after that. And the flash of brilliance where you cut somebody to ribbons never seems to pull that person to your side and
Yeah.
never seems to win the crowd that's watching.
Yeah, that's not a good long-term strategy. Next question, education. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, where Winston Churchill gave his Iron Curtain speech
Ah,
to warn against
yeah.
the threat of the Soviet Union, and that an Iron Curtain had. I could give the Bamboo Curtain speech about China. For
Okay,
my
one more
mom.
question, and then I'm going to pass it back to Rich. What interests do you have outside of politics? Sports, dancing, singing, watching The Bachelor?
I have a tremendous desire not to dance. I actually recently at my niece's wedding, I did dance. I danced, I believe, for a complete song. I think that covers me for many years. I love tennis. I love all sports pretty much. When I'm not boycotting them because they drive me crazy politically, as if that's what they're supposed to be there for. That's the most of it. And I look at our world, I guess, and I do have trouble separating politics. Politics. I worry when I think about my kids when I'm dead and gone, 100 years from now. I don't worry about whether they're going to have enough money. I worry about is whether they're going to live in a free society. And I'm
Absolutely.
not looking for perfection. I mean, sometimes libertarians, we're looking for, every imaginable freedom, and that's great. That's a good thing. But I'm talking about basic democratic human rights. That is at war right now in our world, and frankly in our country.
Totally agree with that. To your point about politics, it is so hard for me. I've had to leave Facebook. I can't help myself when somebody talks about politics and is passionate about an issue that they have no understanding about because it's a mile wide and an inch deep. And when you ask them a question or two about why they believe what they believe, they can't really communicate it well. And when you're as involved in politics as we are, we know that it impacts every aspect of our lives, our children's future, our day to day, everything that's going on out there. Everything that they're trying to do, from COVID mandates, vaccine mandates, lockdowns, all of these things are political in nature. Our life, we can't live our life anymore. Our federal government is nothing like our founders envisioned a limited government to be. People turn to the government, the federal central government, for answers. And as a libertarian, I can imagine that this drives you absolutely bonkers.
Boy, bingo. Boy, did you say that well. I have jokingly, although it's not completely a joke, jokingly said to friends, we live in the freest, most democratic, totalitarian society in the history of mankind. And the reason I say that is we do have freedom. We do have, to those who are always talking about the Second Amendment, I say be prepared, but leave that Second Amendment until we've fully explored all our opportunities to make our country what it ought to be through the First Amendment, through talking and through acting, through doing things. People don't realize how important their activity is. We have a theory in government that government should do everything for everyone, that somehow we should be self-actualized through the federal government, and every spiritual or social or other thought or action we have, there ought to be an agency somewhere in Washington that's telling us how to do it better. And that is insane. And it leads to the sorts of things like an NSA that's gobbling up every bit of financial, social media information, and all this metadata on us. And that's outrageous. It's interesting in this world in which I think the biggest fear is totalitarianism. I fear it from China, and I fear their attacks on Taiwan and their domination of Asia, which is the engine of economic progress right now in the world. And yet I fear it from my own government.
Mhm.
in terms of them having that same attitude that they should run everything and they should. This recent activity in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is very close to me, about critical race theory, about some of the transgender policies, and largely about being shut out. They've already seen that you know they've got the Department of Justice in Washington putting them on a terrorist watch list type deal. This shows both the danger we are in, but also the power of regular people getting involved and doing stuff politically, speaking out and doing more than just voting, but getting involved, collecting signatures to do something. Part of what they've been doing is trying to recall these folks. And that's a difficult process. I don't know if it'll be successful, but it's action and it demands a response. And it's the way I think that talking about it isn't enough. We have to take action.
Do you believe the root cause of this kind of movement towards a centralized government is a lack of fundamental civics education where, I'm a student of the founders. I love reading about the founding documents and how they were so skeptical of a centralized government, individual freedom for the first time. I don't think the millennial generation and some of the younger folks out there that are activists actually understand why the Constitution is so important and why it is specific on individual rights, not group rights, not community rights, not government rights. It was designed to give the individual as much freedom as possible because they knew the behaviors of individuals collectively was the best way to form a great society. Do you think the education system has failed in this sense?
It has, but again, we can hope that the federal government and state governments and local governments will teach kids about constitutional rights and about the beauty of this country. And what has happened is, I think Marxist professors, and frankly, when I was at college in 1978 and 79, almost every teacher I had was a socialist, a Marxist, Trotskyite. They had the weird flavors way at the end of communism gone bananas, and that hasn't changed. And it is a problem if all the professors in higher education, not all, but literally 70-80% are communist. That's not a good thing. And so I think that has hurt because they've been able to use race as a way to say, look at this terrible thing. Look at the racism that Black Americans have faced. And what can we say except, yes, that's terrible. Now, we can also say, I have a poster behind me. It's on the door there. I have to move my head just right. It's a poster of John Brown. Now, John Brown was made out to be kind of a crazy guy. And look, I wasn't there. Most of us weren't. We don't know how solidly, whether he was a stable genius or he wasn't or what. But we know that he ended up giving his life to end slavery. That as much as our nation failed by making a deal and allowing slavery to continue and so on, it was rectified. And it was rectified because hundreds of thousands of people, most of them white, almost all of them white, gave their lives to fight. And in some cases they were drafted, but in lots of cases they weren't drafted. They went and because people agitated, and that's the beauty of our country, and that's about individual freedom. And the reason we favor individual freedom is because that's the building block. If you favor only family rights, well, then the kid maybe doesn't have any rights, or the wife or the husband or whatever. Well, and I won't even make the joke about the husband not having any rights. But anyway, but these are the sorts of things that if you have group rights, you lose people. Then Hispanic folks have this many jobs they get to have, or they have this many freedoms. But that doesn't necessarily translate. It's got to go to the individual. And that's just common sense. It's kind of like, what's the building block of cells? Well, it's the atom, it's of molecules, it's the atom. And so, but that's something that isn't there around the world. And I point out to people, because so much is brought up about sexism and racism, they're both huge problems. I have to, acknowledge that. But of course, men are individuals. Each person of each race is an individual. And so you have to judge people individually. And the other thing I point out to people, I've asked a lot of different people, what part of the world has this the best? Where are men the least sexist? Where are folks the least racist? And I think from everything I hear from people, is right here in North America. Maybe more than Europe, less sexist than Europe. I think that's the way it is from what I hear from different people and from my tiny number of experiences. But in other words, this hate America, look, the principles that you can beat up Thomas Jefferson with are the principles he wrote down in the Declaration of Independence. And I don't think it makes sense for any of us to pretend that Thomas Jefferson was the most wonderful person who ever lived. We never met him. We don't know. He might have been a jerk all the time. He might have been a wonderfully nice person that somehow got misunderstood. It's what he wrote. All men are created equal. That revolutionized the world. And to not give it its due is to endanger that concept. And that's what we're seeing. There was a great piece in the Wall Street Journal today about a guy writing who's a Chinese person, lived in China, and talking about the difference between America and China, but pointed out now so much of what the left is doing is Maoist type cultural revolution strategies that are ripping our society apart. And I think that's extremely scary. And people standing up to it is the only way to stop it. It's not going to be stopped in the intelligentsia isn't going to stop it.
Yeah. And let me just along that thought right there, Paul, it seems to me that there was a time when Republicans and Democrats weren't all that different. They would argue over, Republicans would want a 15% capital gains tax, Democrats would want a 30%, or the Democrats wanted to increase welfare spending, Republicans wanted to pull it back just a little bit. But since the Trump administration, maybe longer, it really seems that Democrats have fundamentally changed to the point where they had a tacit support of the 2020 riots, critical race theory that you talked about, and even Biden's socialist Build Back Better plan. They're supporting that. What has changed in the Democratic Party to cause them to shift so far to the left?
Well, and both parties have shifted. We hear about the Republicans shifting and the far right controlling the Republican Party. And the truth is, Trump isn't really the far right on all kinds of issues. He's more in the middle. He's more populist. And I like populists. I don't like authoritarians. And the second a populist moves over into authoritarianism, then I'm against him. But the major media in our country has a tendency to just label anybody who's for things that are popular, who's the popularist, as an authoritarian. That's not quite fair. But what's happened is you used to have the Northern liberal Republicans and the Southern conservative Democrats. They're gone. And so now you have parties where you don't have that countervailing force. And so people have kind of adjusted. And now within primaries, where few people vote, you're going to have the more radical elements, get elected, or the more popular elements. Sometimes some of the change that's happening is because you have a country that is largely center right, conservative, and you have a media and an intelligentsia, an academia that is extremely liberal. I point out to people, when you talk about the left-wing media, the media is to the left of the Democratic Party. If the Democratic Party stops trying to take everybody's guns and outlaw the Second Amendment, you're going to see that the media continues to talk about it, because so much of that has been driven that way.
I get really nervous about where we're headed. And the only place I'm hearing common sense is, to your point, Paul, when you talked about the person from China coming to this country fleeing totalitarianism. You hear it from people out of South America, out of Cuba, our recent immigrants that come here, and they came here for that individual American dream. And what they're seeing from the left and what they're seeing in the media, the outright lies about what are happening, the willingness to lie about people, even though it can be exposed that they're lying, they are raising the alarm to say, we've seen this before. This is very dangerous. And I don't think Americans have this propensity to think everything's going to be okay, that freedom is a given, that our system of government is a given. And it's, as Ronald Reagan, I think, said, we're only a generation away from losing our freedom at any given time. And it's sad to me that the only people that seem to be fighting the hardest are the people who recently immigrated here. And the media seems to think that it's a good thing that we keep moving to the left, and taking away these individual freedoms. I don't know where this ends. It's kind of scary for all of us that are politically entrenched.
It is scary because those are very powerful forces, and there is kind of an anti-Americanism in the sense that I've always been critical. Like, I don't like America being the empire of the world. I hate when people talk about superpowers because I think that's bunk and it's dangerous talk. I don't want America to outcompete China in some way that we get to be the world's dominant force. I want people to be free throughout the world. And so I've been very critical of our foreign policy, what we've done recently in the Middle East, and I'm including Afghanistan in that, Vietnam, other things. At the same time, throughout all of that, was the US just a different kind of style government than the Soviet Union? No. Is what I call the Chinazis now, the communists who are committing a genocide in Xinjiang. These are not equivalents. This is not a competition between two economic rivals. This is a very dangerous thing. And it's made a difference for me to travel the world. I've grown to appreciate America more traveling the world because I've had people come up to me and say, in England recently, what's wrong with you guys? The world needs you. Don't you understand that? And I traveled to Hong Kong and got tear gassed in the 36 hours I was there, marching in some totally peaceful march, and went to Taiwan and so on. And you see this vibrant democracy cobbled together out of guts and fighting a totalitarian, Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists were totalitarians in the same way Mao was. It was the ugly other side of that same ugly coin. And what Taiwan has accomplished, the idea that would just be, smushed by this totalitarian monster is hard to accept. And you realize the reason they haven't been is because of America. And when I say that, it's not just the ships going through the Taiwan Strait. How did those ships get there? They got there because we were free, and people, all kinds of people could put shoes together and sell them, could grow crops, could do all kinds of different things. And we got wealthier and wealthier. This is what we have to guard. And look, you want to criticize America, do it. And let's hear it, because we're going to want to fix it. That's what we're about. So it's not the criticism is no problem, but don't lie about what this country has been all about. And look, I went to jail for 5.5 months in the 1980s for refusing to register for the draft because I opposed that policy. I'm not a pacifist. I'll go fight if I think it's a just war, but I wanted to send a message that if I don't think it's just, I'm not going to be there. And I want you to know ahead of time. Very, very clearly communicated, didn't do me much good. But the truth is, I think probably the best president in my lifetime is Ronald Reagan, who lied about that issue when he ran in 1980 and then put me in jail. So it gives you just a little bit of a sense of the world's a complex place. And I can hate Ronald Reagan's guts if I want to for lying about that one issue and then deciding to prosecute people when he said he was going to end the program. But I don't hate Ronald Reagan. I'm glad he said the good things he said. I'm sad he didn't do every good thing that I wanted him to do. That's what democracy is. It's never going to be perfect. I try to explain this to my libertarian friends. It's never going to be perfect.
Mhm.
But look, it's so much better than the alternative.
Absolutely. Individuals aren't perfect. So when you build a country based on individualism, it's going to have a lot of warts, but we have to look at the positive of what we have created. And to your point earlier, there is nowhere else in this world where individuals were given freedom, self-rule. The great experiment of America, most people don't realize this was never done ever before. This was people ruling themselves. And in order to have that type of society, you had to limit the size of government so that people could thrive, that they could build, that they could develop, that they could, do the right things. And would it be perfect? Absolutely not. But I don't know if it was Walter Williams, I think it was, that said, all you have to do is look at the border. Are they trying to get out or are they trying to get in? I think the border today tells us whether or not we are a place that people want to be or they want to get away from. There's no better place in this world. And the people, the self-loathing of America, it just drives me crazy because I'm a grateful person. The week of Thanksgiving, I'm grateful every day. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is that I was born here and that we had the founding fathers that put this government together, and that we all have the opportunity still today to make a difference, to build our own job, to share our wealth with others, to help the poor. There's nowhere else in the world that there's more philanthropy than in the United States. And that is a testament to the greatness of this country, warts and all. To be honest, growing up in the Bronx, Kenny and I went to high school in the 70s, and I went to a public high school where I was a minority and never had a problem in the Bronx with anybody. It was a melting pot, got along with everybody. And as the years went on, I thought this argument was almost settled. I thought most people that really tried hard could make it here. And I still believe that. But it seems today with this younger generation, they're rehashing an argument that if you're not a white male, then you can't be successful. And I think that's a sad message that they're sending. And I don't know where that came from. Do you have any ideas?
It came from a bunch of deluded, very well educated, but poorly educated professors and so on. I think it's critical race theory, but it's more than that. It's this whole Marxist look at everything's oppression. And the truth is, I think oftentimes I'll take you to task one little bit in that I don't think young people buy into that in any way anywhere close to the way it's portrayed that they do. Because of course in colleges it's going to be the academic elite that tends to be more that way because that's what the professors want. And I think the one nice thing, we're about the same age. We went through integration. You could make some constitutional or other arguments against busing and so on, but once you put people together, things changed. And it was wonderful to see. And I know that it was tough to be friends between races in the 1970s like it is today. I see every day in Northern Virginia where I live, safely outside the Beltway. I see Black and white and Asian and Hispanic and kids playing together, walking home together. It has changed a lot. And And I think, and you guys probably feel the same way, I take a certain amount of pride that, we went through some things,
Mhm.
and I'm not pretending I went through the horrors of the civil rights movement or anything, but in other words, we had an experience. I still know people who are friends on Facebook and so on, who were the first Black person I met in school when they integrated, and Carolyn Johnson's locker was right next to mine, and the greatest laugh in the whole world. And it's just, once that happens, then it isn't race anymore, and we need to protect that, what went on and what was done, and not allow it to get ripped apart. And I think that's starting to happen, but only because some regular people stood up. It's not going to be stopped on the floor of Congress, and nothing's going to happen on the floor of Congress or the floor of your state legislature until somebody outside says, hey, they can't do that. And I remember my mom, my wife says the same thing though. They can't do that, can they? And that is so, and it's not just American, but it's very much an American concept. We believe we're in charge of the government. Hey, wait a second. This is our country. This is our community. This is our street. And I don't think you can do that. And that's what keeps things in check. And if we get busy enough, if we get worried too much about, I love the wealth we have because it gives us power as individuals to do things. But if we ever get to where we stop doing things and we just kind of sit back and sip martinis, the world will go to hell in a handbasket.
Right, Paul, I think we have time for another question, and I really want to get your opinion on Stephen Hayes and Jonah Goldberg. They just recently resigned from Fox News. There was a time where I really respected the opinions of Stephen Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, also Bill Kristol, Liz Cheney. I thought they were strong conservatives. When Trump became president, it seemed like all that changed. And I don't know what happened. I don't know why they're so anti-Trump, because I think to myself, as a conservative, are you against conservative justices? Are you against border security? Are you against energy independence? Are you against a strong military and tax breaks and fewer regulations? So I really don't understand why they dislike Trump so much. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that. Why do you think that is?
Well, and I have a very favorable view of both of them. I don't always agree with them, and I can kind of think of some times I haven't agreed with them, but they're thoughtful. A lot of times they're right. They write very well. Years ago, I worked with Steve Hayes, who was writing a term limits piece and was talking back and forth over a weekend. Very bright guy, nice guy. And so I like them. I have friends who are never Trumpers. My view on Trump was pretty much that I told a friend, I'm scared of Trump. And he used to call me, after the election and Trump won in 2016 and through that, still scared. I'd go, well, I'm still a little concerned. Trump's persona is what almost all of this is. I am very concerned with his post-election 2020 behavior. I wanted him to be more presidential, bring the arguments. And as you know, I think there were some irregularities that happened in the election that should be taken account of. I don't know what you do to actually change the election, because I think that horse has kind of left the barn in terms of some of them being, the way that they opened ballots that should have been checked before they open them. And once they open them, there's nothing you can do. And do you throw them all out because there might have been a problem? I don't think so. So, there's all kinds of things like that. But generally, Trump continually surprised me. I thought his Supreme Court picks are without any question whatsoever the best of any Republican president in my lifetime, by far. I thought that, he stood up to China when everyone has pretty much kowtowed, no pun intended, to China. I think there's some important things he did. None of that has any impact on the media left anti-Trump and kind of the official Washington anti-Trump. I was mad that Trump was viewed as an outsider during the 2016 campaign because I thought he's no outsider. I mean, here's a picture at the Clinton wedding. He's giving money to all these different politicians. But every day reading the Washington Post and just vicious hit after vicious attack after vicious attack from the whole establishment media, who seemed to want him to win the Republican nomination, but then all of a sudden he was a terrible guy. It told me he was the outsider, and part of I think what drove them is Trump was not part of the smart kids. When I was in school, I got to be part of the smart kids if I wanted to be. But oftentimes I wanted to be more with the kids who like football or whatever. So, but there's a certain amount of that, I think, in politics. There's a certain amount of sophisticated, we're the leaders and the brilliant elite of our country. And Donald Trump was a ruffian, a barbarian, one of the unwashed. I think so much of that is that. It's not, there might be a tiny intellectual thing. After the election, they can say, well, I think he, drove the January 6th rioting. They can make different attacks, but of course they were attacking him as a fascist and a puppet of Russia the whole time. None of that quite panned out. Why was there such an attack? And I think one, he may have been much more the outsider than I ever gave him credit for, even at the end, certainly at the beginning. And I think just culturally and kind of in an upper class type, he's part of the lower classes. Mm-hmm. He's, the working class that they love when it's voting for Democrats is all of a sudden a bunch of rotten, no good Joe Sixpacks when they vote for Donald Trump.
He exposed their ineffectiveness when he came. He showed them all those things that were promised to Republican voter year after year after year. President Trump came in and the emperors in DC had no clothes because he was able to bring energy independence. He stood up to China, wanted to bring jobs back, and he brought manufacturing back to the United States. He built a wall that is now being defunded. He did the things Republicans over the years in DC said, oh, now it's a little too difficult to do. We didn't realize you voted for us, but we don't have a big enough majority this year, or we don't have the Senate, or we have the Senate, we don't have the House. All the excuses, Donald Trump exposed them for lack of will, because he was the first president, in my opinion, that was really took the stance of the individual citizen. What was good for the American citizen was what Donald Trump fought for. And that did not sit well in DC, to your point, Paul. They're elite, and they have processes, and they have procedures, and they have cocktail parties, and he wanted none of it. He wanted to be out there on the construction site, building jobs, digging oil wells, building restaurants in America, and he exposed them. And they're still reeling from that because he left the impression. Now all Americans know that follow Donald Trump, that it can be done. And if you don't do it, it's because you're not trying hard enough. And they have been exposed. So people like Jonah and Stephen Hayes, they have always been part of that. Great writers, good gentlemen, I'm sure, but they are part of that apparatus that is, what you called the elite in DC. And I think that was Donald Trump's most effective thing that he did besides all of his policies. He exposed DC for what it is.
There's a story that's pretty quick, but I think it's a great story to show how Washington works and how Trump was a little different. And someone tipped me off to it, and I did some investigation, and there was a Vox story, very left-wing organization, and it was all about how Donald Trump had just kind of crazily tore up this 188-year postal treaty and was causing all these problems. He's just a crazy man. And then you get to about the fourth paragraph and they mention, but he does have a point. And his point was that there's this treaty that allows China to send little knickknacks from Beijing to Washington, D.C. for less in postage than it would cost to send it from Philadelphia to D.C. That seems a little funny. And then you read a little bit further and you see Ronald Reagan didn't like it either. Here's a quote, oh, it's a terrible thing. And then, this person didn't like it and this president didn't like it, but it's still there. It's no longer there. That treaty has been ended. And you know what? They negotiated pretty easily a new treaty because Trump said, we're not doing that. And it doesn't mean that he's right in everything he does, but it just is one of those blatant examples of how dysfunctional Washington is about little things, and how a business-oriented guy who always is sweating the small stuff is like a dog on a bone. That is not going to keep happening. We are going to take care of that problem.
That's a great way to end this conversation, Paul. Paul, it has been such a pleasure, and I hope we can get you back, because I definitely want to talk about your term limit efforts, because I think that 80% of the country supports that. We can talk some of the, I loved Ron Paul. I loved Rand Paul. I would love to talk a little bit more about the Libertarian Party and why they struggle to get traction in the world of politics. So hopefully we can have you back. But on behalf of myself and Ken, we really appreciate you bringing your expertise and your wonderful opinions here to Hands on Politics, and taking this time out of your day. And I hope you'll join us again.
I would love to. This was much fun. And I'm not always good at lightning rounds. I have a tendency to talk, but it has been great fun. So
I also wanted to say thank you, Paul. I knew it would be interesting, and you did not disappoint.
Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks, everyone.